The air on my balcony tastes different here. Cleaner. It's not the sharp, industrial tang of Columbus I grew up with, but something softer, tinged with the faint scent of the distant ocean. 6 months. It's been 6 months since I drove away from everything I'd ever known. And some mornings, the quiet still feels loud. It's a good loud, though. The kind that lets you hear your own thoughts for the first time in a long, long time. My phone buzzes on the small metal table beside me. It's an email. For a second, my stomach does that familiar, conditioned clench, the one that used to signal an incoming emergency. A new bill to cover, another fire to put out. But that reflex is fading. The name on the screen is Mia, my sister. I haven't heard from her directly since the auction. I tap it open. There are no excuses. No long, winding stories designed to make me feel guilty. Just 2 short sentences. I get it now. I'm sorry. I read it once, then a second time. There's no swell of victory, no triumphant surge of I told you so. There's just a quiet hum of closure, a low, steady note that settles somewhere deep in my chest. This apology, it isn't a trophy. It's just a period at the end of a long, painful sentence. I hold my finger over the screen, and instead of deleting it, I slide it into the archive. It's a part of the story, but it's not the part one need to live in anymore. I take a sip of my coffee and look out at the new city. My city. For the first time, the silence feels less like an absence and more like peace. But 6 months ago, peace felt like a foreign country I'd never have the visa to enter. 6 months ago, I was still Eric Miller, the family's silent partner, their human safety net. And I was just days away from discovering how heavy a family can be when you're the only one holding it up. My name is Eric. I'm 29. And until last year, I thought I understood what family meant. Not the Hallmark card version, but the kind you build your life around, even if it means carrying more than your share of the weight. I've always been the quiet one, the responsible son, the one who sends flowers on birthdays and picks up the slack when nobody else even notices. There is slack, but I didn't grow up thinking I'd be the backbone of a family that constantly made me feel like I was disposable. That part happens slowly, almost quietly, like rot under the floorboards you don't see until it all caves in. Growing up in suburban Ohio, I was the middle child, the buffer zone. My older brother, Adam, was the golden boy, varsity quarterback, effortlessly charming, always surrounded by a crowd of friends who laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. My younger sister, Mia, was the princess from the moment she was born, doted on, protected, and never told no. And me, I was the one who got B+ grades and was told I wasn't living up to my potential. I didn't mind, really. I found a kind of comfort in being overlooked. It gave me space to work. I kept my head down, earned a scholarship to Ohio State, moved out, and eventually started my own small IT firm. By some miracle, after 3 grueling years of ramen noodles, 16-hour days, and getting ghosted by every investor I pitched to, it took off. The funny thing is, when I was struggling, they were silent. The phone calls were few and far between. But when the money came in, that's when I became family again. That's when my value was suddenly, clearly defined. It started small. My dad, Richard, called one afternoon. His voice had that strained, man-of-the-house tone he used when he was about to ask for something he felt he shouldn't have to. "Eric, your brother's having a tough month. Sales are down. Could you help cover the last few payments on his truck? Just until he gets that promotion he's been talking about. Just until." That phrase became a recurring theme. Then came Mia's tuition for her private liberal arts college, a place far too expensive for any of us. But she'd had her heart set on it. The financial aid didn't cover enough. "Sweetie," my mom, Susan, had said, her voice dripping with manufactured concern, "we can't let her down, can we? It's only for a little while." A little while turned into for years. Soon after, my mom needed help with the roof repairs on the house I grew up in. Then the heating system failed in the middle of a brutal January. Then came the kitchen remodel she'd always dreamed of. The one she'd cut out pictures for and taped to the fridge for years. I paid for the granite countertops, the stainless steel appliances, the whole thing. And just like that, I was paying for 3 households, mine included, and still getting texts from Adam on a Friday night that said, "Can you Venmo me for the groceries? I'm a little short." At first, I didn't mind. I was genuinely grateful I could help. I loved them. Or at least, I loved the idea of them. The idea of the family we were supposed to be. I even convinced myself I was building something. A legacy. Maybe. I figured one day I'd be able to look back and say I made life better for the people I loved. But something about the way they treated it, like it was owed, like my success was a communal resource they had a right to, started eating at me. It wasn't the money. It was the absence of acknowledgement. The thank yous became rarer, then stopped altogether, replaced by an air of expectation. Last Thanksgiving was the turning point, the moment the first real crack appeared in the foundation. I hosted, not because I wanted to show off, but because for the first time, I finally had a home big enough to seat everyone comfortably. I had the dinner catered from a nice restaurant downtown. I spent the day before cleaning, setting up a fire pit in the backyard, making sure everything was perfect. They arrived an hour late, walking in like they were guests at a hotel. Nobody offered to help, not with setting the table, not with bringing drinks out, and certainly not with the mountain of dishes later. Adam made a toast halfway through the meal, raising his glass of wine and talking about how lucky we all were to have each other. To family, he'd said, looking around the table with that $1 million smile. It's the one thing you can always count on. The people who always come through for you. He never once mentioned the fact that I had paid for the entire thing. He didn't even look at me. Mia brought her new boyfriend and barely looked up from her phone, except to complain that the Wi-Fi was slow. And my dad, he spent the entire evening recounting stories about how much tougher things were in his day, and how kids now have it so easy with their computers and their fancy gadgets. I felt his eyes on me when he said it. A subtle dig that was meant to remind me that my success wasn't real, that it wasn't earned through calloused hands and a sore back. I swallowed it all with a tight smile, refilling glasses and clearing plates. The perfect host. But inside, I felt a deep, cold distance opening up. I was in a house I owned, at a table I'd paid for, surrounded by people who shared my last name, and I had never felt more alone. Then came the night that unraveled everything. It was a random Tuesday, maybe 2 months later, in late January. The sky was that flat, unforgiving gray that settles over the Midwest in winter. I had just finished a long, brutal meeting with a potential client and came home exhausted. I kicked off my shoes, loosened my tie, and saw the blinking light on my phone. One new voicemail. It was from my dad. I pressed play and put the phone to my ear, expecting a complaint about the snowplow service or another reminder about Adam's property taxes. But it wasn't that. His voice was clipped, tired, and sharp in that special way only fathers know how to be. There was no greeting. "I just saw your company's name in the business journal." He started, talking about some big expansion. "Must be nice. You know, your mother and I gave you everything. We worked our fingers to the bone so you and your brother and sister could have a better life. And what do we get in return? Silence. You float in and out, throwing money around like it makes you better than us." His voice grew colder, laced with a resentment so deep it felt ancient. "All you do is take. Eric, you take the credit. You take the spotlight. You've never given this family anything real, anything worth remembering. If you had any pride, you'd stop acting like we owe you something for your success and just leave." The message ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It stunned me. For a second, I thought I must have misheard it. So, I played it again, the words echoing in the empty room. "All you do is take. You've never given this family anything worth remembering. Just leave." I didn't yell. I didn't call back to defend myself. I just stood there, staring at the phone for a long time. The words didn't just hurt. They rewrote history. They erased every late-night wire transfer, every tuition payment, every bailed-out credit card, every single sacrifice I had made, thinking it was my duty. In their story, I wasn't the provider. I was the debtor. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city lights I used to love, the ones that once represented possibility. Now they just looked like a million distant, cold stars. Something inside me gave out. It wasn't a loud, dramatic shatter. It was a quiet snap, like an old, overstressed hinge finally breaking under too much weight. I packed a single bag that night, a few changes of clothes, my laptop, my passport, no dramatic goodbye note on the kitchen counter, no announcement. I logged into my bank's website and, one by one, paused all the recurring payments tied to my family's accounts. Mia's tuition, Adam's truck payment, the monthly transfer that covered the difference on my parents' mortgage. I sent a brief, polite email to my assistant, instructing her to field any non-essential calls for the next few weeks. Then I walked out of my front door, got in my car, and drove south, leaving the gray Ohio winter behind me. I didn't have a destination, just a direction away. I drove for 3 days. The first day was a blur of highways and cheap motel coffee. My mind a static hum of my father's words on a loop. All you do is take. By the second day, the hum started to fade, replaced by the drone of the tires on the asphalt. I crossed state lines without noticing, a ghost moving through the American heartland. On the third day, somewhere in Nebraska, I saw a sign for Denver. The mountains. It sounded like the opposite of the flat, claustrophobic landscape of my life. It sounded like a place where a person could breathe. 3 days went by after I checked into a small, furnished Airbnb in Denver. Then a week. Radio silence. No one called. No one texted. It was the most jarring and validating silence I had ever experienced. They didn't miss me. They hadn't even noticed I was gone. It confirmed a terrible truth I had long suspected. My presence was only felt when my money was involved. My absence was just an absence. I spent that first week doing nothing. I'd walk to a little coffee shop near the apartment every morning, sit with a black coffee, and just watch people live their lives. I didn't journal. I didn't work. I just existed, reminding myself what uninterrupted silence felt like. No buzzing phone signaling another crisis. No looming obligation. No one asking, "Can you just do me one more favor?" It was strange at first, how foreign the calm felt. It was like I had to unlearn the habit of constantly bracing for someone else's disappointment. It took them almost a full month to finally notice. A full month before one of their needs ran up against my absence. Mia was the first. She called late one Friday night. I was sitting on the small balcony of the Airbnb, watching the distant mountains turn purple in the twilight. I almost didn't answer, but a morbid curiosity won out. I swiped to accept the call but said nothing. "Eric." Her voice was shaky, trying for casual but failing miserably. "Hey, I just logged into the school portal, and my tuition didn't go through this month. It's showing a past due balance. Did something happen with the account?" I could hear the panic she was trying to smother. That fake, airy tone you use when you're trying not to sound desperate. She wasn't asking if I was okay. She wasn't wondering where I was. She was troubleshooting a broken ATM. I let the silence hang in the air for a few seconds longer, just to make her feel it. Then I disconnected the call. I didn't have the energy for a fight. Instead, I sent her a single text message, using the words that had set me free. Thought I never gave this family anything. No follow-up, no explanation, just that. She didn't respond, but the dam had broken. Within the hour, I had from missed calls from my mom, to from Adam. Then came a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. I knew who it was before I even listened. My dad. His voice was no longer cold and dismissive. It was furious. The volume cranked to 10. "Eric, we need to talk. Right now. Call me back. Whatever this little stunt is. It's not funny. You're being childish. Your sister's future is on the line because of your little temper tantrum. You need to grow up and fix this. No apology. No questions about the voicemail he'd left me. Just demands. Just that same old tone that said, "You owe us." It was hilarious in a dark, tragic way. They didn't see the hypocrisy. They genuinely believed they were the injured party. I deleted the voicemail without a second thought. That weekend, I rented a car and drove out to Boulder. I needed more space, more quiet. I hiked alone, something I'd always wanted to do but never got around to. Every time I had planned a trip in the past, someone in the family needed a bailout. A broken air conditioner in the dead of summer. A late credit card payment that was about to wreck Adam's credit score. I remember one time, Mia called me from a resort in Cancun, frantic because she'd lost her wallet and needed me to wire her $500 in emergency cash. I later saw pictures on her Instagram of a shopping spree she'd gone on the very next day. That memory popped into my head as I stood at the edge of a cliff trail, the wind cutting through my jacket. The entire valley stretched out below me, vast and silent and magnificent. And I laughed. I laughed out loud. A real, gut-deep laugh that echoed off the rocks. The sheer, breathtaking absurdity of it all. I had been funding a lifestyle for them that I myself had never had the time or peace of mind to enjoy. It took 3 full weeks before my mom broke the silence with something more than a string of passive-aggressive voicemails about disappointing his mother. She sent an email. The subject line was simply, "We need you to come home." No greeting. Just a long block of text that started with, "I don't know what's gotten into you, Eric," and quickly spiraled. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She wrote about her sleepless nights, about Dad's blood pressure, about how Adam was worried sick, a blatant lie. I was sure. She mentioned the sacrifices they made for me, conveniently forgetting that I had repaid them 100 times over. It all culminated in one final, guilt-laced sentence: "Family doesn't abandon family." I stared at that line for a long time. Family doesn't abandon family. Except they did. They abandoned me every time they made me feel like a debit card with a heartbeat. Every birthday they forgot because they were too wrapped up in Mia's social life or Adam's latest drama. Every holiday where I sat in the background, a silent spectator, while Adam gave his grand speeches and Mia was showered with gifts. Every time they took money from me without a simple thank you. They didn't call it abandonment. They called it tradition. They called it love. Amidst the flood of angry texts and manipulative emails, one message stood out. It was from my cousin, Emma, my mom's niece. We'd grown up together, and she was always the quiet observer, the one who saw things the rest of the family chose to ignore. Her text was short and simple. "I've always admired how patient you are, Eric, but I'm glad you finally stopped being their safety net. When you're ready to talk, I'm here. Not to convince you of anything, just to listen." That message hit harder than I expected. It was the first time anyone in my extended family had ever acknowledged the dynamic. It was a lifeline of sanity in a sea of gaslighting. The truth is, I didn't want revenge. I just wanted peace. But her words made me realize something important. I wasn't just running away. I was taking a stand. I didn't reply to my mother's email. Instead, I forwarded it to my lawyer, Daniel Prescott. Daniel had helped me set up my business and a few trust funds years ago. He was sharp, no nonsense, and fiercely loyal. My instructions were simple. "Daniel," I wrote, "I want to start the process of liquidating some assets and restructuring my finances. First, please halt all unofficial financial support to my family. Second, I want to transfer the remaining funds in Mia's educational trust to a scholarship program for first-generation college students, the ones who actually need the help." Then, a thought struck me, a memory of a document I'd signed years ago. "Also," I added, "could you look into the deed for the lake house up on Erie? I paid it off a few years back as a shared family investment. I want to know whose name is actually on the paperwork." Turns out, my father's promise that he would add my name to the deed once the lawyers sorted it out was just another empty gesture. My name was the only name on it. I had forgotten. In my rush to please them, to provide for them, I had signed the papers, made the payments, and forgotten that on paper, at least, I was the sole owner. They had been living in my house, rent-free, for 5 summers. That Sunday morning, sitting in that quiet Colorado coffee shop, I made a decision. I booked a flight back to Ohio, not to reconcile, not to be worn down by guilt. I was going home to collect my receipts. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. The flight from Denver to Columbus felt like traveling backward in time. The expansive blue skies and sharp, clean air of Colorado gave way to the familiar flat, gray lid that hung over Ohio in early spring. It was a sky that demanded you keep your head down. I felt the old weight settling on my shoulders as the plane descended, a Pavlovian response to the geography of my past. I picked up a rental car at the airport, a generic, anonymous sedan. Driving through the streets I knew by heart felt surreal. It was like watching a movie of my own life. There was the diner where I'd worked during my first year of college, the park where I'd scraped my knee as a kid, the turnoff to the high school where I had been a relative ghost. These places held memories, but they felt like they belonged to someone else now. I drove straight to the house, the one on Maple Street, the house I helped renovate when Dad threatened to sell it, unless someone paid to fix the water damage in the basement. It looked exactly the same from the outside, tidy. 2-story colonial with pale yellow siding, a well-kept lawn, and a big oak tree in the front yard. It was a perfect picture of suburban stability, a well-crafted lie. As I pulled up to the curb a few houses down, I saw Adam's old pickup truck parked in the driveway. It figured he'd moved back in after his own finances imploded. I watched the house for a minute, my hand on the gear shift. There was a flicker of hesitation, a final, dying echo of the son I used to be, who would have walked up to the door and tried to talk things out. But that son was gone. He'd died on the floor of my empty condo 2 months ago. Listening to a voicemail, I got out of the car and walked up the driveway, my footsteps silent on the concrete. I didn't knock. I still had the spare key my mom had given me years ago, the one she'd probably forgotten about. The lock clicked softly. I pushed the door open just enough to slip inside and closed it behind me without a sound. The moment I stepped into the foyer, I heard voices coming from the living room. They were muffled at first, but the tone was unmistakable, agitated, complaining. I stood perfectly still in the shadows of the hallway, my back pressed against the wall. "He's just being dramatic," Adam was saying. His voice was full of that lazy, confident dismissal he reserved for anything that inconvenienced him. "He'll come crawling back once he gets over himself. He always does. He needs to be the hero." Mia's voice followed, quieter but laced with a distinct whine. "I just don't get why he's doing this to us. I mean, it's not that much money to him, is it? He has his company. He can afford it. It feels so personal." There was a grumble from my dad, something I couldn't quite make out. Then, my mom's voice, smoother, the practiced sound of a victim. "I just don't know where we went wrong. Richard, we raised him to know what family means. For him to throw it all back in our faces like this, it's a betrayal. He was always the weakest," my dad finally said, his voice loud and clear, full of a bitter certainty that cut through me more than any yelling could have. "Always hiding behind that computer of his, acting like money makes him special. He thinks because he can write a check, it makes him a man. It doesn't. It just makes him a wallet." I stood there in the hallway, unseen, as they continued to tear me apart. They dissected my personality, my motives, my very character, painting me as a selfish, unstable child who had inexplicably turned on them. They were a committee of blame, and the verdict was unanimous. It was my fault, all of it. Not once did they mention the years of financial support. Not once did they acknowledge their own demands. Not once did they wonder if maybe, just maybe, they had pushed too hard. I didn't cry. I didn't storm into the room to confront them. I didn't even feel the hot sting of anger. All I felt was a profound, chilling sense of confirmation. This was who they were when I wasn't in the room. This was their truth. They had never seen me. Not the son. Not the brother. Not the person who had sacrificed his own peace for theirs. They only saw the function I served. And now that the function had ceased, the person attached to it was a problem to be solved. I backed out as quietly as I had come in, the front door closing with a barely audible click. The cold air outside felt good on my face. It felt real. I got back in my rental car and drove north toward the lake. The 2-hour drive was a quiet meditation. The ugliest truths are often the most liberating. There was nothing left to save. No relationship left to salvage. There was only the cold, hard work of untangling myself. The lake house was just as I remembered it. A beautiful frame with a wide deck overlooking the water. I had bought it with a foolish, optimistic dream in my head. A place for family gatherings, for summer weekends. A place where we could build happy memories to paper over the cracks in our foundation. I had paid for every board, every nail, every piece of furniture inside. I walked through the front door with my own key. The air inside was still and smelled of pine cleaner and old wood. I walked through the open-plan kitchen, my footsteps echoing in the silence. My eyes went to the wall above the fireplace. It was covered in framed family photos, pictures from summers spent here. My parents laughing on the deck, Mia and her friends posing on a boat, Adam holding up a fish he'd caught, a big group shot of everyone's, uncles, cousins from a 4th of July party 2 years ago. I scanned the photos, one by one, and I realized, with a slow, dawning clarity, that I wasn't in a single one of them. I had been here for all of those events. I had probably taken half of these pictures, but I was not on the wall. It was as if I had been methodically, perhaps even subconsciously, erased. My only contribution was the house itself, the invisible stage on which their happy family play was performed. I took out my phone. I didn't take pictures of the view, or the cozy living room, or the stone fireplace. I started snapping pictures for the real estate listing. Wide shots of the rooms, close-ups of the new appliances I'd bought, the expansive deck, the waterfront access. I documented it all with a cold, dispassionate efficiency. Each photo felt like a reclamation. You don't get to keep the memories when you erase the man who paid for them. By nightfall, I was in a hotel room back in Columbus. I emailed the photos to Daniel with a simple message: initiate the sale of this property immediately. List it as is. That was Saturday. The for sale sign went up on Monday morning. I waited until I saw the listing go live online before I sent one final message. To the family group chat, I attached a screenshot of the real estate listing. My message was short, borrowing their own words back to them. You said I never gave this family anything worth remembering. So I'm finally giving you what you've always acted like you wanted: distance. No more tuition. No more car payments. No more roof repairs. And as for the lake house, sell your own memories. I'm out. I didn't wait for a reply. I left the group chat and blocked all their numbers. I thought that would be the end of it. A clean, sharp break. But what I didn't realize was just how deep the web of their dependence had gone, and how fast it would unravel once I cut every single thread. Because within the week, Mia was facing official expulsion. Adam was fired from his job after missing too many shifts trying to figure things out. My parents, let's just say their bank called with some serious questions about a mortgage they could no longer afford. And me, well, I was already halfway to the airport for a new trip. This time, Tokyo, first class, no guilt, no strings. The unraveling had begun, but the real chaos was just getting started. I was somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, 30,000 feet in the air, when my phone finally caught up to the chaos I'd left behind. After a 12-hour flight with no Wi-Fi, the moment we landed at Narita Airport and I switched off airplane mode, my phone began to vibrate uncontrollably. It buzzed against the plastic tray table for a solid minute. A frantic, angry swarm of notifications, dozens of missed calls, a flood of voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize. Friends of Mia, probably, or distant relatives deputized to talk some sense into me. The text messages were a chaotic waterfall of panic and rage. There were a few from my dad that looked like they started as threats, full of capital letters and exclamation points, but quickly unraveled into desperate, half-formed sentences like, "We didn't mean it that way," and "You're still our son." That last one made me laugh. A short, sharp bark that earned me a strange look from the woman in the adjacent seat. I hadn't been their son when it was convenient for them to see me as a bank. Now that the bank was closed, my sonship was suddenly a matter of urgent importance. I didn't listen to a single voicemail. I didn't open any of the attachments, which I assumed were screenshots of Mia's overdue tuition bills or Adam's repossession warnings. I just watched the notifications stack up, a silent slideshow of their panic. It's funny how people who tell you that you've never given them anything suddenly develop a perfect memory for exactly how much you gave once it's gone. I muted the conversation threads, powered the phone off, and dropped it into my carry-on. For the next 2 weeks, it was going to be a camera and a map, nothing more. Tokyo was everything I needed it to be. Clean, quiet, and completely, beautifully anonymous. I was just another face in a sea of millions. I wandered through ancient temples in Kyoto and got lost in the neon-lit canyons of Shibuya. I ate ramen in tiny, 6-seat restaurants and spent an entire afternoon in a silent garden, watching koi fish swim in lazy circles. I let my mind breathe in a way I didn't know was possible. There was no guilt weighing down my shoulders, no surprise emergencies waiting to ambush me. For the first time in my adult life, I was just me, not someone's backup plan, not the family fixer, not a wallet, just Eric. 2 weeks into the trip, I finally allowed myself one point of contact. I unblocked just one person, Emma. She had sent a single message during the whole fallout, which had been waiting for me. No pleading, no drama, no taking sides, just a simple, "When you're ready to talk, I'm here. Hope you're somewhere safe." I met up with her the day after I got back to the States. We sat in a small cafe near her apartment in a quieter part of the city. She looked at me, really looked at me, and her first words weren't about my family. "You look different," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "Lighter. I feel lighter," I admitted. We talked for an hour about my trip, about her work, about anything other than the mess I'd left behind. It was easy, normal. Then, her expression turned serious. She hesitated for a moment before reaching into her bag and pulling out her laptop. "I want to show you something," she said, her voice gentle. "And I'm not showing you this to upset you. I just figured you should know. You deserve to know what they're saying." She slid the laptop across the table. It was a Reddit thread from the subreddit r/assistance, a place where people in dire straits post their stories and ask for financial help. The username was something generic, like Ohio Student 21, but I knew who it was immediately. It was Mia. She had posted her story, asking for help to stay in school after an unexpected family emergency. She told a carefully constructed tale that painted me as the villain without ever using my name. She wrote about her older brother, who had always been a little unstable. She said he'd had a breakdown, cut the family off for no reason, and left them all in a terrible position. She claimed he was mentally ill, and that they were all just trying to survive the fallout of his erratic behavior. She was the victim, the innocent casualty of my supposed crisis, and people were donating money. Strangers, moved by her story of a poor college student abandoned by her cruel, unhinged brother. They were sending her $50, $100, $200. Emma's lips were a thin, tight line. "She's raised almost $6,000 so far." I saw one of our aunts share the link on Facebook, saying how proud she was of Mia for being so resourceful. I stared at the screen, and the feeling that twisted in my gut wasn't anger so much as a deep, profound sadness. There it was again, that same family story, reshaped to fit the victim narrative. Only this time, she was doing it publicly, monetizing it, weaponizing the sympathy of strangers who didn't know the first thing about our lives. And the worst part, the part that truly broke something in me, was the realization that she probably believed it. In her mind, she was the victim. She had no capacity to see what she and the rest of them had done. I could have gone nuclear. I could have created my own Reddit account and laid out the entire sordid history for the world to see. I could have posted screenshots of the texts, the emails, the bank statements, but I didn't. Rage posting and public callouts was their style. Loud, messy, and designed to attract attention. I decided to do something quieter, something more precise. That night, I went through years of my digital records. I took screenshots of every single payment I had ever made toward her education. Bank transfers with the memo Mia tuition. Credit card statements showing payments directly to her college's bursar's office. PayPal receipts for the emergency textbook funds I'd wired her during her freshman year. The down payment for her study abroad trip to Spain. It was all there. A meticulous digital record of my quiet support. The total came to just over $94,000. I uploaded the screenshots to a private Imgur album. No names were visible. No dramatic captions. Just a cold, undeniable wall of evidence, dates, dollar amounts, and payment confirmations. Then, using an anonymous, throwaway Reddit account, I posted a single comment on her thread. It wasn't angry. It wasn't accusatory. It was just a simple, pointed question. Before you donate, maybe you should ask her where the other $94.00 in tuition assistance went. Some people forget who helped them the moment the help stops. And then I posted the Imgur link. It didn't go viral. It didn't need to. But the effect was immediate and devastating. Within hours, her original post was flooded with questions. The tone shifted from sympathy to suspicion. By the next morning, the post had been removed by the moderators for suspicious activity and potential fraud. Her attempt to control the narrative had blown up in her face. That was the first real consequence any of them faced that they couldn't blame on my instability. It was a direct result of her own actions. The second consequence came a week later. I received a certified letter at my office. It was from my dad. It wasn't handwritten. It was typed, formal, like some sort of pseudo-legal notice. It opened with a sentence that made me choke on my coffee. We are formally requesting a meeting to discuss the breakdown of our family dynamic and the equitable distribution of shared family assets. They were trying to hold a board meeting to fix what they had broken. But buried in the ridiculous corporate jargon was the real reason they reached out. They wanted a portion of the proceeds from the sale of the lake house. Apparently, they believed they had emotional equity in the property. I passed the letter to Daniel without a word. He read it, a slow smirk spreading across his face. Emotional equity? He said, shaking his head. That's a new one. Want me to send them a polite reminder that emotional equity doesn't hold up in court? I nodded. Do one better. I said, send them a copy of the original purchase agreement. The one my dad signed. The one where, in his own handwriting, he had acknowledged the terms of the deal years ago. The one with the clause Daniel had insisted I include, which clearly stated, I, Richard Miller, acknowledge that this home is purchased by and remains the sole property of Eric Miller. I relinquish all future claims to ownership or profit from this property. He had forgotten, or, more likely, he had hoped that I had. That letter shut them up about the lake house real fast. But the silence didn't last. Not once word got out that I was planning to sell the main house. 2. See, while I was in Tokyo, letting my mind go quiet amidst the temples and crowded crosswalks, Daniel and I had been working on a quiet side project. It wasn't born of vengeance. Not initially. It was born of necessity. I was untangling my life, and that meant accounting for every last thread. Years ago, long before the kitchen remodel and Mia's tuition, I had loaned my parents a large sum of money. It was $80,000. The bank was threatening foreclosure after my dad had been laid off from the plant, and they had exhausted all their options. There was no official contract, just a desperate late-night phone call from my mom and a verbal agreement. I would give them the money to save the house, and they would pay me back slowly when things got back on track. Of course, things never quite got back on track. Or, if they did, The money went elsewhere to a new car for Adam, to one of Mia's expensive hobbies. The loan was never mentioned again. They never paid back a single dollar. I had forgotten about it too. In a way, I had written it off as just another cost of being their son. But Daniel hadn't. He was a lawyer, and he dealt in facts, not forgotten feelings. He tracked every deposit from my account into theirs. He compiled the wire transfers, the bank statements, a clear and indisputable paper trail of the debt. And with that evidence, we quietly filed a lien on the house. A lien is a legal claim against a property. It meant that if they ever tried to sell or refinance, they would have to pay me back first. More importantly, it meant that I, as the primary lien holder, could legally force a sale to collect the debt they owed me. The house on Maple Street, very symbol of their suburban stability. The stage for their family drama was now legally entangled with the son they had cast out. The news hit them like a physical blow. Emma called me the night they received the notice. I could hear the stress in her voice. "Eric, they're panicking," she said, her voice low. "Your mom called my mom in tears. She said you were trying to make them homeless. Your dad is, well, he's threatening to go on social media, to tell everyone what a monster you are." I sighed, leaning my head back against my office chair. I stared up at the ceiling, feeling a familiar weariness settle over me. "Let him," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. "I've got receipts. Bank statements are a lot more convincing than a Facebook rant. Let's see who wins that PR war." But what I didn't tell her, what I was only just beginning to understand myself, was that this wasn't for revenge anymore. It wasn't about winning. It was about closure. It was about drawing a final, uncrossable line. They thought my generosity was a weakness. They mistook my silence for compliance. They believed I was a faucet they could twist on whenever they were thirsty. And now they were learning what real, prolonged thirst feels like. They tried to fight it. Of course, they hired a cheap local lawyer who sent Daniel a blustering letter full of accusations and empty threats. He claimed the $80,000 was a gift, not a loan. Daniel's response was swift and brutal. He sent back a package containing the bank records, a sworn affidavit from me, and the master stroke, a copy of an old email my mom had sent me a week after the transfer. The email was full of her usual flowery, emotional language, but it contained one fatal sentence: "We will be forever grateful for this loan. Eric, we promise to pay you back every penny as soon as we can." Their lawyer quit the case the next day. The foreclosure auction was scheduled for a Tuesday in early October. And yet, the most satisfying moment, the moment that would finally sever the last frayed cord connecting me to them, hadn't even come yet. Because on the day the house went up for auction, I wasn't going to be watching from afar. I wasn't going to get the news from Daniel or Emma. I was going to be there. I was going to walk through the front door one last time, not as a ghost in the hallway, but as the reason the house was empty. I parked across the street the morning of the auction. The air had that sharp, stale chill that always hung over our neighborhood in early fall. The leaves on the big oak tree in the front yard were turning a brittle, dying yellow. I sat in the car for a minute, just watching. It was surreal, seeing the home I grew up in. This place that had absorbed so much of my life, so much joy, so much bitterness, so much unspoken resentment, no, reduced to a property listing. A small white sign was staked in the front lawn. Its black letters clinical and final, notice of foreclosure auction. Today at 12 p.m. No trespassing. I got out, my hands shoved deep in my pockets, and walked slowly toward the house. The front door was already open. Daniel was inside, speaking quietly with the auction representative, a middle-aged woman with a clipboard and a no-nonsense expression. He saw me and gave a small, supportive nod. "You don't have to be here for this, you know," he said gently, his voice low. "I want to be," I replied, and I did. Not for vengeance, not for the spectacle, but because this moment deserved a witness. This ending needed to be seen, to be felt, to be acknowledged, to make sure it didn't just slip by like everything else I'd been forced to swallow over the years. This was the ledger being balanced. I walked through the living room slowly, my shoes making hollow sounds on the bare hardwood floors. The furniture was gone, but the ghosts of it remained, lighter squares on the walls where pictures used to hang, indentations in the carpet where the sofa had sat for 20 years. I ran my hand along the wall, my fingers finding the dent in the plaster from the time Adam, in a fit of teenage rage, had thrown a baseball inside. I saw the faded stain on the dining room carpet where Mia had spilled a bottle of bright red nail polish, and then tearfully blamed it on me. I saw the wall in the hallway where my parents used to pin up our report cards and crayon drawings, until, sometime around middle school, they quietly stopped adding mine. It was strange how little of myself I saw here. I had lived within these walls for 18 years, but I had left almost no trace. It was as if I'd been a guest in my own childhood. I stepped into the kitchen next. That one hit harder. I remembered late nights spent at the kitchen table, cramming for exams while my mom prepped for holiday dinners. I remembered scrubbing dishes, while she pretended not to hear my dad ranting about his boss in the other room. I remembered laughing with Emma over burnt pies and undercooked turkeys during family gatherings that felt more like obligations than celebrations. And now it was just a kitchen, a box of empty cupboards, silent appliances, and forgotten effort. There was a single photo still tacked to the corkboard by the phone, one they must have missed in their hasty packing. It was a picture of the entire family, taken 2 Christmases ago. I remembered that day. I had paid the photographer's deposit. I had bought the matching sweaters they all insisted on wearing. And I remembered, with a fresh sting, how they had cropped me out of the version they posted on Facebook, because the framing looked better without me on the end. I pulled the thumbtack from the board, took the photo, and looked at it for a long moment. A family, a perfect, smiling family. I turned it face down on the empty granite countertop. By noon, a few cars had started to arrive. A couple of serious-looking bidders, professional investors maybe, some curious neighbors, pretending to be nonchalant as they peered from their windows. And then, finally, my family. They pulled up in Dad's old Chevy, all 4 of them packed inside like they were on some twisted, tragic family road trip, the final visit to a place they no longer owned. They saw my rental car parked across the street. Then they saw me, standing on the porch, and their world, which had been unraveling for months, was about to come to its final, public, spectacular end. Mia got out of the truck first. She was wearing oversized sunglasses, but they couldn't hide the blotchy, red-rimmed puffiness around her eyes. She looked younger, stripped of the entitled confidence she always wore like a second skin. Adam followed, slamming the passenger door shut. He scowled when he saw me, a low, guttural anger radiating from him. He was here to play the enforcer, the protective older brother, a role he only ever remembered when there was an audience. And then my parents, my mom, Susan, looked worn down, 10 years older than the last time I'd seen her in person. The carefully maintained facade of the cheerful suburban matriarch had crumbled, leaving behind someone frail and exhausted. But my dad, Richard, still walked like he thought he owned the ground beneath his feet. He spotted me instantly, his eyes narrowing into slits of pure fury. "Eric," he called out, his voice low and bristling with a rage he was barely containing. It carried across the quiet street. "We need to talk. Now." I didn't move from my spot on the porch. I just stood there, my hands in my pockets, and waited. That simple act of stillness, of not immediately obeying, seemed to infuriate him more than anything I could have said. He strode up the driveway, Adam a half step behind him like a loyal, angry shadow. My mom and Mia hovered near the truck, a small, miserable audience. "You're really doing this?" Dad said, stopping at the bottom step of the porch, forcing himself to look up at me. "You're going to stand here and watch as your own family is humiliated. Over what? Exactly?" Some perceived slight. For the first time in years, I looked him directly in the eye, and I felt nothing. No fear, no intimidation, no lingering need for his approval. Just a vast, empty calm. It's not a slight, Dad, I said, my voice even and steady. It's a pattern, and it ends today. You ungrateful little, he started, his face turning a dark, mottled red. He took a step forward, his hand clenching into a fist. Adam tensed beside him, but I held up a hand, a simple, non-threatening gesture that stopped him cold. Don't, I said. Just don't. We're not going to do this here. Mia finally joined them, her voice cracking as the tears she'd been holding back began to fall. I'm going to lose my scholarship because of this, she sobbed, the words aimed at me like daggers. I had to drop 2 of my classes already. My GPA is ruined. Why are you doing this to us? I turned my calm, unwavering gaze to her. I paid for your first 3 years of college, Mia, I said, not unkindly, but stating it as a simple fact. Every tuition bill, every textbook, every dorm fee. You never said thank you. Not once. Instead, you let them convince you I was the problem. I didn't, she started, her voice faltering. You posted online that I was unstable, I said, pulling out my phone and holding it up. You lied to strangers to get money because you felt entitled to it. And now you want sympathy from me? Her face crumpled, and she turned away, unable to meet my eyes. The truth was a harsh light, and she wasn't used to being in it. My mom finally spoke, her voice pleading, the last arrow in her quiver of guilt. We're a family, Eric, she whispered, her hand clutching her chest. Families don't do this to each other. We make mistakes. We forgive. We don't destroy each other. That was it. That was the line. The one that summed up their entire philosophy. Their mistakes were to be forgiven, and my forgiveness was to be endlessly given. No, Mom, I said, and my voice was harder now. Families don't take like this. You took everything you could. My time, my money, my trust. You took until there was nothing left to give. And when I stopped, you didn't ask what was wrong. You didn't ask if I was okay. You just got angry that the supply was cut off. You called me selfish. You called me weak. You told me I'd never given this family anything. I paused, letting the words hang in the cold autumn air. I'm just giving you what you asked for. The auctioneer's voice suddenly rang out from behind me, sharp and professional, cutting through the thick bubble of our family drama. All right, folks, we'll be beginning the auction in 5 minutes. Please have your bidder numbers ready. My dad looked around, his eyes wide with a sudden, dawning panic. The reality of the situation was finally crashing down on him. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't an argument he could win by being the loudest one in the room. It was a legal proceeding that was happening with or without his consent. You can't do this, he said, his voice dropping to a desperate rasp. This house is everything we have. You wouldn't even have your company, your money, if it weren't for us, for the foundation we gave you. I almost laughed. The foundation they gave me was one of neglect and conditional affection. The foundation they gave me was the motivation to work 16-hour days so I could get the hell out. You're right, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. So I'm taking it back. They just stood there, rooted to the driveway, a tableau of disbelief and impotent fury. They were helpless for the first time in their lives, stripped of their power, with no one to blame but the son they had created and then discarded. And I turned my back on them and walked away, back into the house that was no longer theirs. As the auctioneer began to speak, the house sold within the hour. A retired couple from out of town, looking for a place to be closer to their grandkids. They paid in full, just over the asking price. I watched from a window as my family got back into their truck, their shoulders slumped in defeat, and drove away without a single look back. I signed the paperwork on the hood of Daniel's car. I handed him the keys. I didn't enter the house again. There was nothing left for me there. As Daniel and I prepared to leave, Emma pulled up. She got out of her car and walked over, her expression a mixture of sadness and relief. She didn't say I'm sorry or that must have been hard. She just looked at me, her eyes full of a quiet understanding that I valued more than any words. "Is it over?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, the word feeling bigger than it was. "It's over." She nodded, then looked at the house, then back at me. "For what it's worth," she said, "you carried them for a long time. Eric, it's okay to finally put them down." I didn't realize until that moment that I had been holding my breath. I let it out in a long, slow sigh, the tension I'd been carrying for a decade finally beginning to unspool. The war was over. The silence that followed wasn't the empty, painful silence of being ignored. It was the clean, quiet silence of a slate wiped clean. Now I just had to figure out what to write on it. 3 weeks later, the moving truck arrived at Maple Street. My parents had tried to fight the eviction, claiming they had residency rights. But the court order was clear, cold, and legally binding. They had 30 days from the date of the sale to vacate the premises. No exceptions. I wasn't there to see it, but Emma was. She went, not to gloat, but to make sure my mother didn't try to stage some dramatic, tearful scene for the neighbors. She told me later that it was a sad, disorganized affair. They didn't even pack everything. They just grabbed what they deemed essentialities, a few pieces of furniture, the television, and left the rest in disorganized piles on the floor. Years of accumulated clutter, boxes of Adam's old high school sports trophies, broken appliances they never got around to fixing, forgotten memories they no longer had space for. The new owners, a sweet older couple named the Hendersons, had been gracious enough to let me have a few days to clear out what was left before they moved in. I hired a junk removal service, but I went with Emma to do one final walk through myself. The house felt cavernous and pathetic in its emptiness. The ghosts were still there, but they were fading. As we sorted through the debris of their lives, Emma called to me from the attic. "Eric, I think you should see this." She was holding a dusty cardboard box labeled junk. Tucked inside, beneath old tax records and faded photographs of people I didn't recognize, was a journal. My journal. It was a simple, spiral-bound notebook from my senior year of high school. I thought it had been lost years ago. I sat down on the dusty attic floor and flipped through the pages. The handwriting was a younger, more optimistic version of my own. Every page was filled with goals, written out in detailed, earnest lists. Get into Ohio State with a scholarship, major in computer science, start my own business by 25, buy a house, and then, on the very last page, written in big, hopeful letters, take care of my family. Make sure they never have to worry about money again. A dry, hollow laugh escaped my lips. It was funny how none of those dreams ended the way I thought they would. I had achieved every single one of them. I had gotten the scholarship. I had started the business. I had bought the houses. And I had taken care of my family, so thoroughly and completely that I had nearly erased myself in the process. I closed the journal and tucked it into my jacket pocket. It was a relic from a different person, a boy who believed in a version of family that never really existed. We worked for the rest of the day. We donated the furniture that was still usable. We trashed the broken things, the forgotten things, the junk. Emma was a quiet, steady presence beside me, the only family I had left, and the only one I truly trusted. When the last box was hauled away and the house was finally, completely empty, she came over and hugged me for a long time. "You did the right thing, Eric," she whispered into my shoulder, "even if it doesn't feel like it yet." And she was right. It didn't feel good. Not in the triumphant, victorious way you see in movies. There was no soaring sense of victory, no final, satisfying confrontation that ended with slow clapping applause. There was just silence, a sharp, echoing silence that slowly, over the next few weeks and months, gave way to an unfamiliar feeling, peace. I moved shortly after that. I sold my condo in Columbus, the one that had always felt more like a hotel than a home. I sold my company to a larger tech firm that had been trying to acquire it for years, leaving me with more money than I knew what to do with, and, more importantly, no obligations. I packed 2 suitcases, got in my car, and drove west until the landscape felt different, until the air tasted new. I bought a loft in a converted warehouse in a city I'd only ever seen in pictures. It was smaller, simpler, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every book on the shelf, every dish in the cupboard was something I had chosen. For me and me alone. There were no secret bills, no hidden emotional debts, no guilt. The calls eventually stopped. The angry emails from my parents dried up. Adam and Mia, I heard through Emma, had moved into a cramped two-bedroom apartment together. Adam was working a string of odd jobs, and Mia had been forced to transfer to a local community college, taking classes at night while working during the day. They were surviving. They were learning, the hard way, what it meant to stand on their own. Over time, even the bitterness faded. I found that I didn't hate them. I just disconnected. It was like finally cutting the last thread of a frayed, heavy rope that had been dragging me underwater for years. I could finally breathe. I could finally surface. One night, months after I had settled into my new life, I was sitting out on my balcony. It overlooked the sprawling, glittering lights of the city. I was sipping a cup of tea, just watching the cars move like rivers of light in the streets below. I thought about that last Thanksgiving, about the empty toast Adam had made to family, about the way they all smiled for a picture, like they were actors in a commercial, completely unaware that the glue holding their perfect little world together was cracking. And I realized something profound. They were never really a family, not in the way that mattered. They were a system, an ecosystem that had evolved over decades, with each person playing a specific, codependent role. Adam was the charming but helpless golden boy. Mia was the indulged princess. My father was the bitter patriarch, and my mother was the master manipulator who kept all the gears turning. The system only worked as long as I played my part, the silent, useful, and perpetually forgiving provider. The moment I walked off stage, the whole production fell apart. And now, they had to learn how to stand without me propping them up. They had to learn how to be individuals, not just components in a broken machine. Maybe, in a strange, painful way, cutting them off was the most genuinely loving thing I had ever done for them. I wasn't just saving myself. I was giving them their only chance to save themselves. I got a message a few months after that. An email. The one that began this story. It was from Mia, sent from her new student email address at the community college. It was short, stripped of all her usual drama. I don't expect a response. I just wanted to say, I'm working now to pay for my classes. It's hard, and I finally get it. All of it. I'm sorry. I read it twice. Then once more. The old Eric would have jumped at the chance to reconnect, to fix things, to ease her burden. The old Eric would have seen her apology as an invitation to step back into his old role. But I wasn't the old Eric anymore. I took a deep breath of the cool night air. I archived the email, not out of spite, not because I hadn't forgiven her, but because I no longer needed closure from them. I had already found it within myself, and for the first time in my entire life, that was enough. Life didn't magically become perfect. The first few months in my new city were marked by a strange kind of phantom limb syndrome. I would be walking down the street, see something in a shop window that Mia would have liked, and my hand would instinctively reach for my phone before I remembered. I'd hear a snippet of a conversation about someone's overbearing father and feel a flash of that old, familiar dread. The habits of a lifetime don't just vanish overnight. They fade slowly, like ink left out in the sun. There were moments of loneliness, too. A deep, hollow ache that would sometimes hit me late at night. It wasn't that I missed them. Not exactly. I missed the idea of them. I missed the family I had always wished for, the one I had tried to build and buy and force into existence. I was mourning a dream, not a reality. The memory that truly sealed the past in its coffin came to me on my 30th birthday. I had decided not to make a big deal of it. I spent the day hiking a trail just outside the city. As I was driving back, I stopped at a grocery store to pick up something for dinner. In the cart aisle, a big, garish card with happy 21st birthday, caught my eye, and suddenly, I wasn't in a brightly lit supermarket anymore. I was 21. It was the final exam period of my junior year at Ohio State, and I was broke, exhausted, and living on instant coffee and cheap pizza. But it was my birthday, and I decided to drive the hour back home, hoping for maybe a simple dinner, a cake, some small acknowledgement that it was a milestone. I walked into the house to find it in complete chaos. My mother was pacing the living room, wringing her hands. My dad was on the phone, yelling at an insurance agent, and Mia, who was 16 at the time, was sobbing on the sofa. No one looked up when I came in. No one said hello. "What's going on?" I asked. My mom rushed over, her face a mask of frantic anxiety. "Oh, Eric, thank God you're here. Mia had an accident. She took my car to the mall without asking, and she backed into a pole in the parking lot. Just a little dent. But your father is furious, and Mia won't stop crying, and I don't know what to do." And just like that, my birthday vanished. I spent the next 3 hours being the family fixer. I calmed Mia down, assuring her it wasn't the end of the world. I took the phone from my dad and calmly negotiated with the insurance company, arranging for an adjuster to come out the next day. I inspected the dent on the car, which was minor, and promised I'd look into a good body shop. When everyone had finally settled down, I realized no one had eaten. So I used the last $20 in my bank account to order a pizza for everyone. We ate it in near silence in the living room. As I was getting ready to drive back to campus, my mom hugged me at the door. "Thank you for handling all that, sweetie," she said. "You're always so good in a crisis." They never remembered it was my birthday. Not that day. Not the next day. Not ever. I was invisible. My only purpose, my only value, was my ability to solve their problems, to absorb their chaos, to make their lives easier at the expense of my own. Standing in that grocery store aisle, the memory washed over me not with anger, but with a clarifying sadness. I hadn't just left them. I had left a role I was no longer willing to play. I bought myself a small, ridiculously expensive slice of chocolate cake, went home, and ate it on my balcony, celebrating the man I was becoming instead of mourning the boy who was never seen. A week later, I called Emma. It had become a comfortable ritual, a way of staying connected to the one piece of my past that didn't hurt. "How are things?" I asked. "Quiet," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Your old street is a lot quieter, that's for sure. I saw your mom at the store last week. She looks tired, but okay. Dad's company laid off a bunch of people, so Richard is working part-time again, doing some construction stuff with Adam." "Adam's working construction?" I asked, surprised. Adam had always looked down on manual labor, considering it beneath him. "Yep, can't be picky anymore, I guess. He and Mia are still roommates. From what I hear, it's a disaster." She chuckled. "But Mia's actually doing really well in school. She's working at a coffee shop to pay her way. It's changed her. She's more grounded." I felt a strange, distant sense of pride for her. They were managing. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't easy. But they were learning. The world hadn't ended because I stopped holding it up for them. "Listen," Emma said, her tone shifting. "The real reason I called, Mark and I finally set a date. We're getting married in June. It's going to be small. Just close friends and family. And, well, you're the first person I'm inviting." The words caught me off guard. An invitation. A family event that felt like a choice, not a summons. "I'd love that, Em," I said, and my voice was thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. I wouldn't miss it. That weekend, I went on a hike with a group of people I'd met through a local club. They were just friends. We talked about work, about movies, about the trail we were on. They asked me questions about my life, and they listened to the answers. Afterward, we all went out for pizza, and we split the bill. It was so simple, so normal, so beautifully reciprocal. It was everything family was supposed to be. Tonight, I'm sitting on my balcony again, looking out at the city that has become my home. The journal from the attic is on the table next to me. I pick it up and flip to that last page, to that earnest, boyish scrawl. Take care of my family. I used to think that meant writing checks, fixing cars, and solving crises. I thought it meant carrying all their burdens so they would never have to feel any weight. I see now that it was a flawed definition. I wasn't taking care of them. I was enabling them, and I was destroying myself in the process. I look at the wedding invitation from Emma, which is propped up on my bookshelf. I think about my new friends, about the life I'm building here, a life based on mutual respect and genuine connection, a life that is mine. And I realize I am finally fulfilling that high school promise. I'm building a new family, a chosen one, and I am taking care of its very first member, me. The quiet hum of the city below sounds less like noise and more like a promise of a future I get to write for myself. And for the first time, there are no other names on the page.